The Lord be with you. We're continuing, of course, in the Gospel according to St. Mark. We're in chapter 14, and we're going to give an attempt to maybe cover a fairly large piece here, maybe a little over 20 verses. So we're getting started we're again chapter 13, but we are 14, and we're starting at verse 53. And so Jesus has been arrested, and we pick up from his arrest. And they led Jesus to the high priest. And all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guard and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But they found none, for many bore false witness against him. But their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Yet even about their testimony they did not agree. And the high priest stood up in their midst and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer to make? What is that these men testify against you?' But he remained silent and made no answer. And the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?' And Jesus said, 'I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, and coming with the cloud of heaven.' And the high priest tore his garments and said, 'What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?' And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit at him, and to cover his face, and to strike him, saying to him, 'Prophesy!' And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, 'You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus.' And he denied it, saying, 'I neither know nor understand what you mean.' And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girls saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, 'This man is one of them.' But again he denied it. And after a little while the bystander again said to Peter, 'Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean.' But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know this man whom you speak.' And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, 'Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times.' And he broke down and wept." I think we kind of flirted with the edges of this as we finished up in our last discussion about this gospel and about the trial of Jesus. He's been arrested. We have this, what the people who constitute the Sanhedrin all together: the high priest, the elders, and the scribes. Interestingly enough, I think you have, I think maybe I'll start with making this point. The first point I think worth making is this really is a very normal sort of trial that would have taken place. Those scholars who look at these documents or search for the archaeological evidence and the documentation evidence have found that there's other trials that seem to take the same pattern as Jesus' trial. You have the Sanhedrin, which kind of is a Jewish institution, but yet it has to live within the Roman Empire, and so it kind of has its function within this system, and they really are kind of performing their function. You know, the book of Deuteronomy does make that expectation that there should be 2 witnesses who can agree in testimony before a person. You kind of see that in that discussion a little bit there, that nobody could agree about what they were accusing Jesus of, and they weren't able to get that 2 testimonies that said the exact same thing. But you do have these. You have this group that has a tradition within Judaism, and within Judaism they would have had the authority to condemn somebody to death. They really probably the things that Jesus is on trial for is, as he says, the high priest uses the word blasphemy. But I think also just simply that he is one who is riling up the people and turning the people against, maybe just against them. I had the discussion a few weeks ago with someone, and they had brought up the idea that that their previous pastor had said to them that the Pharisees always knew what was going on. They always knew, the Sanhedrin, the high priest, that they knew Jesus was the Christ because he had fulfilled so much. They never say that exactly, but maybe that's even part of the reason why they are involved in these events here. But they are bringing charges against them, and all of these people, I think, also is worth noting within this Holy Week event. This kind of Jesus comes in on Palm Sunday on the donkey, and everything that takes place after it, he conflicts with all of these groups that are here in front of him. It doesn't directly talk to the high priest at any point, but he does talk to the Sadducees, who are kind of the priestly party. If you kind of think of a theological / political party within Judaism at the time, they have that question about, they try to give Jesus a riddle about the resurrection of the dead. A man had, there's 7 brothers, 1 bride, and whose bride is she in the resurrection? And they think they've caught Jesus in a logical trap, but they haven't. And they go away, and of course he warns the people against the scribes almost exact right after that, and the elders have a strong relationship with the Pharisees, whom he is conflicting throughout the gospel. So all 3 of these groups that make up the Sanhedrin are people that Jesus has had some direct contact with or indirect contact with, but he's butted heads with all of them in this case. And so, like I said, though, we do have this the system, the trial that Jesus is going through. Many of these steps you see in other examples that the historians who have found this evidence see as taking place in kind of the process, the means by which they go through this. Of course, now that they're in the Roman Empire, they're not going to be able to put Jesus to death themselves. They're going to have to turn him over, hand him over to the Roman authorities, and we will see that the next time we get to talk. So of course we pick up at verse 54. Here comes Peter now, and he's following him at a distance. It's kind of his promise, right? That Peter has, that I will be with you even if it means death. And of course he's not going to go that far. But he does stick with Jesus, and we kind of get this little bit of we're going to, if you would, kind of a good literary form. Mark here takes, lets us know Peter has come into the story as well. We're going to talk about Jesus' trial, but then we're going to pick up with Peter here in just a few minutes. So we have this kind of putting him in the courtyard of the high priest, and he's sitting with the guards, and he's warming himself by the fire. So we get to leave Peter right there, and we'll pick up with him in just a few minutes as well. And the chief priests and the whole council are seeking testimony against Jesus. They don't find anything that agrees. If you would, a lot of the things they do bring up, though, are the main accusation that doesn't hold any weight is something that has happened within this Holy Week event. As I had kind of, I think, indicated a number of sessions ago, a number of the discussions ago, I think one of the things that really has jumped out at me as I've gone through the Gospel of Mark again with you is how much Holy Week is about the temple. And Jesus is, just prophesying at the destruction of the temple. And if we go back to it, whether in a very literal way of I'm going to tear down this temple and build it up again in 3 days, or kind of figuratively with the fig tree and the death of the fig tree and the cursing of the fig tree, or Jesus talking to Peter, James, John, and Andrew about the coming destruction of 70 AD in the Jewish wars. So much of this discussion here is about the temple, and Jesus has kind of, and I think this is a big point here in this trial. Jesus is the one giving them the evidence. He is giving them the tools to put him to death, which I think is important to kind of think. As sometimes we fall into that some people. And I think it's kind of a popular sort of way of thinking even today amongst some theologians and some church bodies, that Jesus is being put to death is kind of an accident, that he really was coming here to bring a kingdom on earth, and that it was just accidental. But no, look at how much of the Gospel of Mark, and also if we could put in there Matthew, Luke, and John's Gospel, it's over a third of that gospel is about the death and resurrection of Jesus. The focus of the gospel, the reason Jesus comes, the reason he is born of Mary is for this moment. And it's his doing. This is the Lord's doing. And he is the one who's even having to give them the tools, the evidence. If you would, that last week, he has been pounding on the priest, the temple, the scribes, the elders, the Pharisees, everybody. He has gone after them to give them as much evidence and much reason to put him to death. He's not doing this is not an accident. He hasn't just like accidentally fallen into this situation. He's the one who is bringing himself put to death. And really, even after we get through, actually, it's kind of interesting, I think, too, is the one witness who said, I'll tear down this temple and build it up, one made without hands. And really, isn't that what he does? In John's gospel, when Jesus speaks to the woman by the well, and she is a Samaritan. Sorry, that's a word I couldn't remember. She's a Samaritan, and she says, well, we worship here, and you worship in Jerusalem at the temple, but we worship here on the mountain. And Jesus says to her, a time is coming when we will not worship, we will no longer worship on a mountain or in the temple, but we will worship in spirit and truth. And that's really what is coming. Jesus is coming to bring the church. It is a thing not made of hands, but it is a thing, and we could probably spend about 10 minutes here just going through examples of, especially in epistles, Christ is a cornerstone built upon the prophecy of the apostles and the prophets, and you are a living stone as part of that church body, that he has built up a spiritual building, a spiritual temple, a spiritual church that is you. And so in some ways, there's almost kind of an irony there that the accusation really is a true prophecy as well. And like I said, Jesus has to be the one to give him an answer. Finally, the chief priest says to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Which really is getting to the point, even in a way that so many don't see or don't fully understand. He is the Christ. He is the anointed one, the one set aside to bring the restoration of Israel, and he is the Son of the Blessed One, which is a title. If you remember, amongst Jews, Israelites, there really comes a time in the Old Testament even in which no one would speak the name of God because it was so holy, the name Yahweh. Even as it appeared in the Hebrew, a text that they would be reading, they would say Adonai or the Blessed One. And so this is really a statement, are you the Christ, that anointed one that God has promised to send throughout the Old Testament, and also the Son of God, as in that statement there. And these are things that Jesus has been hinting at, especially in this Holy Week. He has referred to himself. How is it that the Son of God, Son of David, David calls his son Lord, and he's obviously referring to himself. So he's kind of set them up with this question as well. The chief priest takes it really to its fullest conclusion here, and even calling him Son of God by calling him the Son of the Blessed One. And then Jesus says, I am. I'm not sure if I'm overstepping a little bit here, but often when I see that phrase, I really kind of makes me think of, in part, John's gospel is full of I am statements, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the vine, you are the branches. So there's these very strong statements. In John's gospel, there's also when they arrest Jesus, they say, are you Jesus of Nazareth? And he says, I am. And as you might remember, they all fall back. They all fall down because the power of that word, I am, which is the root of the word, that again, the name that God gives himself in the Old Testament. He reveals himself from the very beginning of Moses' book of Genesis is Yahweh, which is, when Moses comes to the burning bush, what does he say? Tell them I am, which is Yahweh. He is Yahweh. So that is also a statement of, I think, and maybe in this case, Jesus is just simply saying I am, ego eimi. But as I see that phrase I am, that's what it often makes me think of. But then he also says, you will see the Son of Man. And now that is a vision that, remember, we talked about Son of Man another time, but Daniel has a vision, an end times vision, and he sees one like a Son of Man. He sees God, and here is not just a I am also God and man, the two natures of Christ sort of statement, but it is also a statement of connecting himself with this prophecy of the coming of the Christ and of who God is. And you will see me seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Here is a day of judgment and a day of resurrection that is promised through Jesus. It is the final company. You may kill me today, but I am coming and finally in all of my glory to judge the living and the dead, as we confess in the creeds. And the high priest tore his garment. Most likely, if he was wearing any liturgical garments, they would not have been the thing he would have torn, because those have been handed down from generation after generation after generation. I'm kind of working on the assumption they were not lost in the Babylonian exile, that they were somehow kept, but they could be the ones that go all the way back to Aaron. He probably would have torn some sort of undergarment, some sort of tunic that would have been worn underneath of his vestments in that case. But the tearing of the vestments also really kind of is a sign of this is blasphemy. And of course, that's exactly what he says there. This is blasphemy, which is to say this is a statement against God. This is offensive language that leads one away from God, a false statement about who God is. And they agree to condemn him to death, which is what they have. They used to have that power to put somebody to death, but at least they agree. They all condemn to him as deserving death, which is kind of interesting. They don't have the power anymore to condemn or to put somebody to death, but he definitely deserves death. And you see the beatings and the spitting upon and the mocking that is going to follow in this case as well. And of course, because they see him as a false prophet, a blasphemer, one who is leading the people astray, their mockery is kind of like, spitting upon him, slapping him, and saying, prophesy, prophesy, a demand for prophecy. Now we pick up with Peter once again, and we hear, and Peter was below in the courtyard, and he has these three denials. It is interesting, I think, in particular with the denials, that he is... a few things kind of jump off with me, and I don't know if in any particular order. One is that they know he's a Galilean, which always has struck me, because I think you get... if you're a Galilean and they're going to know your accent as a Galilean. If you're a sophisticated Jerusalem dweller, those Galileans might be as though one might hear the accent of someone from Alabama, or maybe from, not to pick on just Southern folk, someone from upstate Michigan, and they're going to have a lot of yah-hey there, and sort of youper sort of talk, and you go, oh, well, you're clearly are not from the big city. You've got that accent to you as well. Peter's denial, he can't seem to bring himself to even say the name of Jesus. He calls a curse on himself that I do not know this man. I mean, he's unwilling to say Jesus' name in this case. Invokes a curse upon him. And of course, then the rooster crows. Jesus' prophecy is fulfilled. And I thought there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I have it has passed me by. But and he breaks down and weeps, and of course this is a true repentant weeping. He sees his sin, he sees his failing, he sees that Jesus' words, prophecy about him that was in the negative, are true. It just as Peter denies Jesus, it does remind us. We have this great kind of Peter event in chapter 8, kind of the last half of chapter 8. Jesus asks them, who do people say that I am? And then, who do you say that I am? He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Wonderful confession about who Jesus is, right? He's spot on. There is no denying it. Then when he tries to tell them, I am going to suffer many things. I'm going to be handed over to wicked men. They are going to crucify me, but on 3 days I will rise again. Peter, that this is the first time he makes that prophecy, Peter takes Jesus aside and says, look, you can't talk this way. That's enough of this sort of conversation. And Peter says, or Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. And then we hear these words. And he called the crowd to him with his disciples and says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever will lose his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in glory of his Father with his holy angels. So we hear a very terrifying sort of statement made there about those words. But of course, we also, thanks be to God, we can also look to the words of that Paul writes to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, when he says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. And even as Peter has failed to keep the faith, to continue to confess Christ even in the face of terrifying moments and in the face of death, he begins to deny he's ever known him, even as he has failed his. I mean, if you would, there's kind of two trials going on here, right? Or two inquisitions. Jesus is being questioned by the Sanhedrin, and Peter, in a much smaller way, not one facing death, but he is put under trial. Jesus succeeds, Peter fails, but Jesus is faithful even when we have failed to keep that word. You know, what is interesting too is we get to the end of the gospel and the resurrection of Jesus. We will, when the women go to the tomb, and the thing that the angel says to them is, see the place where he was laid, but go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. There is an emphasis added there for Peter. Peter has, in his sorrow, in his weeping, has confessed his sin and his failure, but Jesus continues to be faithful. Go tell all the disciples, all the ones who scattered like rats at a sinking ship, but especially go tell Peter, because he needs to hear this message that I have died, I have risen, I am ascending to the right hand of my Father, and I will come again. And that is good news. That is good news that we hear there. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you. Lord, look upon you with favor and give you peace. Amen.